Hello and welcome to the Incubator Podcast. This is your co-host, Sabir Saran.
And I am Darren Boyd. Today we're going to be talking to Lior Yari, who's the CEO and co-founder of Grip Security. Grip is another really interesting platform that we are super excited to speak to. They're in the SaaS security space, and there's going to be a lot that we're going to kind of unravel as we go through this discussion with Lior. Grip specifically is in the control plane space, and we're going to differentiate that between posture management. We are super excited. Sabir and I are super excited to talk to Lior because we've seen the technology, we've worked with the technology, we're selling the technology, and we're behind it for a reason. It can do things that I haven't seen in this space, and we're really excited to dive into it. Lior himself has a very interesting background as well. We're going to let him introduce himself, but he comes from a research space. He comes from Israeli special forces space. He's got a great deal of experience in leadership, in cybersecurity, et cetera. It is late where he is. He's joining us overseas, but we are super excited to have Lior on the show. Lior, if you wouldn't mind just diving in, giving your background, and then speaking a little bit about Grip Security, why you started it, and what it covers. That would be wonderful.
Definitely, and thank you for having me, Brandon. It's really exciting to be here. So, now the CEO at Grip Security. The company was founded about 20 months ago, a bit less than that. But starting in cybersecurity, so I originally came in from the Israeli cyber intelligence or Israeli special forces, where I spent about 7 years as an officer. This is where I met my two co-founders, Idan Fast, CTO, Alon Schenkler, VP of R&D. About half of our Israeli team, I think, we worked together at some point on some interesting project. Following that, worked a bit in a startup industry, and then last interesting role was CTO at YL Ventures, which is now the biggest security-only investor in the world. They manage $700 million invested in seed stage cybersecurity companies in Tel Aviv. So a lot of money that's hyper-specific to security in Israel. And they bring a lot of the expertise, global expertise, and board of advisors, which includes over 100 CISOs from Fortune 500 companies in the US, into Tel Aviv, where you have all this talent within cybersecurity. So as CTO, part of the investment team, I was responsible for technical due diligence and the technical deep dive of us as a VC into each and every subspace in security, until eventually I got too deep, fell in love with one of the biggest problems that we saw there, which is SaaS security, and how when organizations are using hundreds and thousands of different solutions, and when the barrier for adoption for SaaS is basically a sign-up form, organizations and enterprises can manage those SaaS at scale and reduce risk. So I left YL Ventures, was sad for a moment and happy when they invested in our seed round. It was followed a few months later by an A round by Intel Capital, so we raised $25 million last year, about 60 people in the company today, and we're building a SaaS Security Control Plane solution. Stop me for a second.
Yeah, no, and congratulations on that, by the way. We're seeing significant investments in that space, and certainly your history there is very interesting. I'm sure you've seen a lot and participated heavily there. If we can start, what we'd love to do is we want to talk about why what you're doing is so differentiated. Now, for the viewers, before we got on the podcast, I was sharing with Lior that I have a very personal vested interest in this space. I was in IT for a number of years at a time when it was very difficult to categorize what SaaS was being introduced into our space. We looked at CASB solutions. We looked at web proxy solutions. At the time, there was very few API-based solutions, SSO integration solutions. We looked at a lot of options, and none of them, quite frankly, could do what we were looking for by any stretch. And so when we heard about Grip and how Grip is approaching this space, we thought it was incredibly interesting and incredibly powerful. But Lior, before we even go into how you discover, prioritize, characterize, orchestrate, et cetera, can we start with the domain itself? Can you talk to us a little bit about what is SaaS Security Posture Management? What is it that Grip does in that space, and where are you a little bit differentiated in that space as well, focusing on the control plane? Can we start with that premise?
Definitely. I'll go back for a second to research we wrote back in Wild Ventures, CISO current edition, CISO Circuit Edition 5 SaaS Security. We interviewed about 60 different CISOs, asked them a list of questions about SaaS security, and question number 11 was, what would you prefer? A wide solution that gives reasonable security to all of your applications, or a deep solution that gives great security for your top 10 SaaS applications? And the answers are 51% want a deep solution, 49% want a wide solution, and many of the people asked for both, and we forced them to choose one of the options. And it's interesting because it reflects how we view SaaS at Grip. SaaS is a mile wide and a mile deep. There's hundreds and thousands of applications that are used in the enterprise today, and there's a lot to do for each one of them. So Salesforce, as an example, has a manual PDF with 230 pages that explains their configuration structure and all of the different features within it. So you can spend a year building a solution for Salesforce, which would be a really reasonable solution to build because there's a lot of value and a lot of sensitive data within Salesforce. But then if you zoom out for a moment and see how we view SaaS as a challenge, even though your tier one applications, the one that have the good APIs that you can connect to, have risk associated within them, the way SaaS changed how we work and how it broke this traditional model of a closed network with a wall around it. Now, not only the data is in the cloud, our users are in the cloud, our processes are in the cloud, and our apps are in the cloud, and they're accessible from anywhere. So if we used, for example, to be based on IAM and user safety being based on the user leaving the network, even if you forget to delete the user, that you don't have access to the network, with SaaS, it's not always the case. Because if someone's leaving the company, they can use their phone, their laptop, any device that they're using to continue logging in into the system. And then in a scenario where, for example, they're using the same password for the new employer, you suddenly have this risk coming back to the organization with access still being active for the user. Another example is how applications are coming in. We were used to a closed server room where IT were a gateway, or a physical gateway, because you needed to set up a server, install the software, configure the DNS records. Now you go into a website, sign up, and do whatever you want. And with it, there are new challenges introduced at an enterprise level. How do I manage compliance around SaaS applications? Not how do I manage compliance around the records within Salesforce, but the apps that my employees are using. How do I know when there's a breach to one of those applications from a SaaS supply chain perspective? How do I reduce access debt? Access debt that is accumulated when people are signing up to things. How do I reduce it either when they are at the company and when they leave? And then how do I protect myself from password-related exposures that are by design coming in with SaaS applications? So when you think of Grip, there's this entire space of SSPM, SaaS Security Posture Management, doing a very important job of managing configurations for your tier one applications. But then there's all those different problems that are growing year over year of how do I reduce risk at scale when my users are using SaaS? And this is where the SaaS Security Control Plane is introduced.
Thank you for that, Lior. So you mentioned that how do you manage or reduce risk? So could you help for our viewers to better understand what is that risk perception today around the SaaS space? How should they view or prioritize that risk? Typically folks want to address the top 10 Gartner risk vectors and things of that nature, like API security is one of the themes this year. But how does a person start to prioritize this amongst all other aspects of risk in their security portfolio?
So thank you for the questions, Afir. I think when you view SaaS at scale, it creates all those little entry points into your environment. As SaaS presents, SaaS, I think now is the longest unprotected border of the organization. And the risk associated with it are all of those entry points to harming either the data or the processes within the company. So for some applications, this could be introduced as a data exfiltration mechanism, whether if by a rogue ex-employee or phishing attacks based on passwords and logging into the applications, or by the ability to use those connections between our applications and our system to create damage. So we have all those apps connected to our production environments. Each and every one of them could turn off our production servers. And while for many organizations who don't think about it, I'm not familiar with a single company that connected the DNS management tool to SSO.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and has this now led to some of the more recent breaches as well? And Lior, could you expand on that from hey, this is a risk that has manifested itself?
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to talk down on companies that experience the breach. Securing the company is hard, but I can give examples to breaches that were heavily affecting the SaaS security landscape. First one is Block. Block is data of 6 million of the users was leaked online due to an employee having access to systems after they've left the company, and those were SaaS applications. And the second one, from the other perspective, was Twilio, which is a big SaaS vendor with access to marketing automations and email automations for the company, that was breached and introduced their users and their customers to reflective risks from the breach itself. And we saw a few publications about Twilio customers affected by the breach, even though for most companies, the first question is, do I even have users that are using Twilio?
Yeah, one of the so Sabir and I have done a few podcasts now in a couple other adjacent spaces. One of them was we spent a lot of time in API security, and one of the most interesting things is as CISOs were evaluating their API posture, security posture, they often discovered via various tools and mechanisms that they have 3, 4, 5x the exposure they thought. And it's interesting in this regard, even when people are estimating, yes, we know there's lots of SaaS applications here. We're finding with Grip, when you come in and you deploy, they can be off by 3, 4, 5x in terms of that exposure, which is really interesting because you're truly mapping all sanctioned and unsanctioned SaaS applications continuously. Can you talk to us a little bit, because I want to go all the way back to when you look at, let's say, SSO-integrated, it could be as little as 10% of your SaaS applications, right? Maybe even smaller, maybe single digits. When you look at CASB solutions, that doesn't help when somebody is necessarily off net. They're doing other mechanisms of signing up. But can you talk to us a little bit now about the technology? Because I think you do two very, very powerful and stunning things. One is your discovery. And I do want to talk about all of the ways you make that happen because it's incredibly comprehensive. I haven't seen any platforms do what you're doing. And then later, I want to talk about the orchestration because your workflows are where it all comes together. Extremely powerful, even injecting SSO-like capability via policy. So I definitely want to talk about those two things. But can you walk us through how Grip does discovery and why are you able to capture such the entire state of sanctioned and unsanctioned apps?
Definitely, and I'll go back for a second just to explain how SaaS discovery used to be done 5-10 years ago when SaaS applications really started to be noticed by security teams. And historically, this was done through the network. The employees were working in the network, and by monitoring data volumes, again, encrypted data volumes to different applications, we were able to find mostly shared drives, but also looking at DNS results to understand some applications that were used within the company. And the biggest challenge it has is false positive rate, because with the data encrypted, it's hard to differentiate between private use and corporate use of applications. And the second thing is that the world was not only lacking better visibility, it was lacking actionability and context. Because surfacing a lot of problems is good, but then it creates the liability to fix them. And we cannot scale to hundreds and thousands of apps without the automation for remediation and risk reduction. And then we saw two changes that are happening. SaaS is more popular and the employees are working from anywhere. So the network-centric model doesn't work anymore. And what we're trying to shift to is that we're shifting into an identity-based approach to SaaS security. Instead of looking at what people are using through the network, we're trying to shift this focus into their identity. Because really the most comprehensive and ubiquitous touch point between users and applications is not the network, it's actually the identity and email. So when they sign up to an application, they start receiving all of those communication touch points like welcome email, password resets, updates from the email side, and from the identity server, from the identity provider, they receive all of those logins and logs and policies. And what we've built is an NLP supported model, so a natural language processing supported model that can find all of those interactions, consolidate them together with the identity system, and then present a view to the company where they can understand which user is using which application, how do they authenticate to it, which is a key part of reducing risk at scale, and with it take the action required to improve the posture of the application, not from a configuration standpoint, but from an enterprise use standpoint. What makes it extremely unique is that we reduced, let's say, POV time or POV setup time from 3 months of waiting for users to log into apps to 10 minutes, because all you need to do is to connect us to your identity and main identity systems like Auth065, and we automatically are able to historically find every SaaS in the organization, continuously find every SaaS in the organization, and then use this very rich context to provide automations for the security team.
Yeah, I think there's a few fantastic parts of that. One is the idea that you can inject security policy. Like I've seen the product in action, and I think it's remarkable to see the ability to force single sign-on, force password policies. And I definitely want to talk about your use of NLP and RPA, because I think that's a really great combination. We can rotate. You have a vaulting capability. So from the access perspective, I think it does two things. One, I think the user probably looks at it and says, wow, I didn't even know I set up those accounts. Like it's zombied from the perspective of I've either left the company or I completely forgot about that access myself. So that could be very helpful. And then, of course, it helps the company by very rich orchestration capabilities. So can you talk a little bit about how you integrate NLP and RPA to take over effectively those login, to inject a degree of single sign-on, what that vaulting experience looks like? Because I think that's the true power of this. You've discovered everything, and now you're able to inject what's important to us as a corporation to safeguard against this usage. So what does that experience look like? How does that happen? Because I think that's very important.
Exactly. So the world wasn't lacking better visibility, even though better visibility is great. It was lacking actionability and orchestration into the workflows that are now being done manually. Discovery is being done manually at many organizations. There's a huge spreadsheet somewhere that's irrelevant a second after it's being written. But then we want to create those downstream policies for ensuring password hygiene for the users, for accelerating SSO connectivity, for example, automatically discovering who the admin is. So if you think of how we can use NLP to accelerate these processes, today when a company wants to, for example, connect an app to SSO, they don't have the data-driven way of deciding where to invest their efforts. We give them this visibility and understanding, which is a crucial step. Instead of using the popcorn method of whoever told me about his app first. And then the second question is, who should I contact? So we have the list of users, but then applying our sophisticated models, we can find who are the users that are most likely to be admins of the system by recognizing the unique touch points that they see. So if you're getting admin notifications, if you're getting the bill at the end of the month, there's a higher likelihood that you have admin rights for the system. And then instead of sending emails around, the security team can immediately contact the right person. And then we bring down SSO connectivity time from a few months that the application lives within an environment to, if the team is using the tool the right way, a few days at max. And then when we think of downstream policies that we need, the company needs an enforceable way of reducing risk, because SSO is great, but there's many scenarios in which it's not realistic to connect the app, the SSO. Maybe it's because a third party created the user for you. Maybe it's because the apps require extra payment for your SSO, or what's called the SSO tax. So everyone is welcome to go into SSO.tax, which is the wall of shame for all of those applications. But those includes all of our favorite vendors, Slack, Figma, Canva, very popular names. So for all of those reasons, we want to continuously reduce risk as well. And the way we do it is by leveraging RPA, robotics process automation, and mimic the password rotation sequence of SaaS apps. So every SaaS app has an email-based password reset email, which we know how to detect. And then all we need to do is generate it automatically, so we can either revoke access for the users, for example, when they leave the company, make sure that they cannot connect, even if we don't have API access or admin access for the app. And we can use the same technique to enforce strong credentials on the user, rotate their password, place it in our own vault, and then allow for what we call a ZTSA for SaaS, so zero trust SaaS access, where the same vault that ensures your credential security can also ensure your device integrity, ensure there's CrowdStrike running in the background, monitor for files going up and down, and there's a lot of possibilities in this realm specifically.
Yeah, Lior, on that note, that was a great, very compelling overview you gave in terms of how this all operates. But from an organizational dynamic perspective, right? So you have users that want to use particular SaaS applications. They want to go that, and organizations have their processes for onboarding these SaaS applications. How do you actually start to, from an implementation standpoint, introduce grip security into the organizational dynamic, and what stakeholders come to the table? So clearly the identity access management tool, teams would be part of this. You have the cloud security aspect of things. What are some of the stakeholders that would participate in adapting to the workflow you just described in terms of how this all should manifest itself?
So responsibilities around SaaS are spread today between a few different teams within the security organization, and often IT as well. There's GLC that are responsible for SaaS coming in. The security operations responsible for password hygiene, user breaches, phishing, SaaS breaches, while the app is being used. And there's identity, IAM, responsible for revoking access to those applications as people are transitioning either from the company or between different roles. And we're trying to align with all of them and giving them the capabilities that they need to accelerate the work and around securing SaaS. Starting with GLC, today the point when the GLC team is reviewing a SaaS solution is when legal negotiation is being done, which is often, with the way SaaS works, 6 to 8 months after the team has started using the tool. So they already invest 100 hours, 200 hours, 500 hours in implementation and testing. They reach the decision when they want to buy, compared it to 3 other competitors, and then the security team needs to decide if they say yes or no, but they're not in a position to decline because the business needs this application. So we want to apply a shift left mentality there and help them see the app the moment it comes in. What we usually do is that we automatically trigger a security questionnaire for the user of the app. They sign up. 2 hours later, they get a basic questionnaire that the security team can reflect on, and then decide whether they want to engage or wait or see when apps are coming in.
I love that. That's great because you hit the nail on the head. As typical life cycles of call it procurement or evaluation exist out there. So you start with this pilot process, and this concept of a vendor risk assessment it gets introduced, right? So along with that, right there, you can have that starting point, shifting left with grip, introducing that. So you're managing security at the get-go, whether ultimately that a SaaS product gets purchased or not. At least you were managing, even for that pilot, you were containing the risk, and then certainly as it grows, you're managing it instead of trying to reverse engineer later. I love that. That's awesome.
I want to kind of expand on that too, because certainly this was the way when I was doing this, and we're almost coming up on a decade ago when I was actually directly involved. But I haven't seen substantial changes on how we even evaluate some of these SaaS companies. I'm still seeing people do static checklists, static interview questions. They pick their framework of choice. They send that off to the vendor, and sometimes they get a little more sophisticated, evaluating maybe the DNA of the vendor, maybe evaluating their transparency to security events, maybe looking at their the presence of bug bounties and their commitment to securing their SaaS. So we go through these various mechanisms, but it's not continuous. It's usually still interview based when financial teams get involved, procurement teams get involved, or even security teams get involved. So we've got this delay that you've explained, and then we also find this very once a year, and I'll come back to you next year. And hopefully you haven't got breached in between. Hopefully you didn't change anything substantial. I'll come back and I'll ask my questions again. And it's a very tough way to evaluate. And what else could we possibly do when there's so many SaaS options available to us? But you're doing something else in this space. You're taking a multi-vector look at some of the dimensions of these SaaS players, and you're characterizing some. I'll say there's a quantitative element to it. You're characterizing risk of various providers, and I think that over time, being a continuous evaluation of continuous multi-vector evaluation of a risk of a SaaS provider gets extremely interesting. And this may be a little nascent at this point. I'm not sure, but can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I think that's, to me, aside from the discovery and aside from injecting some of our enterprise expectations from a security perspective, this is the next big thing. And I'll even go one step further and say, we used to evaluate trying to use some pairwise calculations and some quantitative expressions, one SaaS over another, and it just wasn't something we could keep up with at the time. So one, what are people doing out there from evaluating the risk of a particular SaaS? And two, what are you doing in that space to do that multi-vector kind of analysis?
Yeah. So our product and data teams have done an outstanding job of building a unique model into how SaaS risk is quantified. I'll give you our assumptions were coming into this. It's most SaaS apps would have been approved if going through a GRC process. Two is risk is a number that should be used for enabling new features and action within the system. So you don't need a number if you cannot do anything with it. And three, the risk score that we give is something that the user should be able to improve. Because if you just get a score that says an app is bad, you have nothing to do about it, aside from saying no and blocking the user, then over time, the score itself wouldn't be useful. And what most organizations are using today are TPRM solutions, which are very good at evaluating the business and how it's effective, and does it have a good security posture, how often they were breached, etc., etc. But it doesn't necessarily reflect the risk to my organization. A very simple example is Dropbox, which is the first example for a bad shadow application for most organizations. They have a 10 out of 10 score within a TPRM solution because they have a great security team, they have a great security posture, and they're doing every possible compliance that you can think of. When you flip it around, there's a difference between 30 users within my marketing team using a shadow instance of Dropbox and 1,000 users that are using a known approved SSO connected instance of Dropbox. So what we're trying to quantify is not, is it a good business, but what are my risk or the risk to my organization by using Dropbox, and what can I do to improve them? So we have a team that are building a risk library, going one by one for every SaaS category, and tagging what sensitive assets those applications have access to. And it's not only data, because again, not only our data is in the cloud, our users and processes and apps are in the cloud. So whether it's the ability to approve payments, access to our production environment, access to marketing automations, recruitment data, financial data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Company designs and secrets, all of them designed within SaaS and have a different perspective in how they affect the organization. Of course, customizable within the Grip system. So for some organizations, HIPAA is more important than PCI when it comes to data or access to production. And then we multiply this together with the actions that you've taken within the company in order to understand the SaaS and reduce risk around it. So did you run it through a GRC process, yes or no? If the answer is yes, you get a bonus. So the app is less risky. Did you connect it to federated authentication? This would give you a big boost. How many users are using it? Is it 1,000 unsanctioned users or 100 or 10? And then how password hygiene is managed for this application. And then we give you the tools to automatically within the system get those actions and improve the overall risk posture of your company around SaaS usage.
Yeah, that I think leads into another area that Sabir and I talk a lot about to our customers, which is you're facilitating a different level of engagement and conversation within an organization. The one thing that we have recognized in an engineering-centric culture, we have to build these bridges. It used to be called shadow IT. I think it's been reclassified as business-led IT, and I think words matter. And I think it's important because this exists because people are trying to do their jobs more efficiently. They're trying to bring new products to market, and it shouldn't be treated necessarily the way as darkly as it has been in the past. And so I love the reclassification to business-led IT, number one. And I love the fact that this allows us to more responsibly propagate the use of the right tools in the right situations. But facilitating that conversation, I think, is important. And to your point, allowing us to change the posture of the risk, I think, is also a very mature way of doing that. So that's an area I definitely want to spend over the coming months. I definitely want to watch as you're building that out and expressing that, because I think that's going to remove some of the adversarial relationships that start to take place when we are policing the way we have been. So like that's a huge tip of the hat. That's huge props, because you're actually, I think, more aware of how organizations are trying to work. So that's a great conversation to facilitate.
On that note, Lior, if you wouldn't mind just telling us what's next for Grip, where's the product roadmap and company roadmap heading?
Yeah, definitely. I'll tell you first what I see as next for the world, and that's next 5 years ahead. If you look 5 years back, BYOD was something people didn't believe could happen for the enterprise. How could people bring their own device? And with great credit to Bradley Bosch, CISO at Tyro Payments, I see the world moving to BYOA, bring your own app. We want the business to move at business speed, and the people we hire should use the tools that help them be successful. Bring your own application. And the same way we've used MDM solutions to reduce risk around BYOA, we're going to see this new upcoming market that enables business-led IT and BYOA directions. So when we look at our roadmap, we want to be this platform or control plane that allows the company to reduce risk at scale for SaaS applications. And specifically, we have so many features that we're thinking of, but we want to connect the user to the organizational process and to the and enforce the policies back to them in a way that helps them use the tool they need securely. And it starts from better discovery and better internal processes within our system, which we focus a lot on. And the second point we focus on is the ZTSA space. What policies are required and what tools can we build for the company to help users use SaaS as the way SaaS is being used. For example, allow by policy the users to connect to sensitive apps from their private device, because today they do so without an approval, but in a way that allows the enterprise to feel comfortable, for example, without being able to download files to their private machines. Because if we used to think of our servers as where data is, now when we log into applications from different devices, our data is going to different locations as well. And I always encourage everyone to open their download folders and see just how much business sensitive data they just have there.
Yeah, we certainly align to the vision and the mindset. And Lior, we want to thank you for coming on. We appreciate the partnership. We appreciate the team. For everybody following or listening to the podcast, expect more on this topic, this subject, this area. It ties in beautifully to everything we end up seeing in the market. We're excited to partner with you, and we really thank you for your time. Again, I know it's late, so I appreciate you spending this time with us.
Definitely. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lior. Take care.